Good morning. From wherever you are joining us today, we gather this morning to find joy and comfort in one another. Come, let us worship together.
You. Love you guys, mean it. The flaming chalice was first used by Unitarians as a symbol of safe passage and refuge for people escaping the Nazi persecution in Europe. Today, we light the chalice to begin our service with these words from Deanna Van Diver. We light this chalice, symbol of our faith alive in this world, naming our vision of collective liberation and daring to remember each other into beloved community.
We're going to start our service with singing Morning Has Come.
together. The light of peace it shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home. Open our eyes to see that light again. Open hearts to welcome it among us. The light of love it shines upon each face. May it bring faith to guide our journey home.
During the past 7 months, we have explored each of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism. Today, we arrive at the month of May. The spring flowers are blooming. The energy of rummage fills the air. And we begin our exploration of the proposed 8th principle. This new principle affirms and promotes journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. How? By our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. In the 7th principle, we acknowledge the interdependent web of life and of life-sustaining resources. The 8th principle effectively asks, how can we be spiritually whole while so many in this interdependent web bear the pain and exclusion of racism and other oppressions? Paula Cole Jones, a member of All Souls Unitarian Congregation in Washington, D.C., recognized the need to name this explicitly in the form of a new principle, and she worked with Bruce Pollock Johnson to write it. She says, quote, "The 8th principle is a proposal for UUs to build inclusion into our spiritual lives and our congregational practices, not just treating it as social justice projects while everything else stays the same. It keeps us relevant in the world in which we live today," end quote. This is a call to action for us as individuals and as a congregation, prompted by this bold, beautiful vision for our world. Spiritual wholeness, beloved community. Who doesn't want that? Later in today's service, we will hear from 3 alumni of the Pledge to End Racism workshop series that we're conducting here at BUC. In their reflections, we will hear how their lived experiences inform their aspirations for our congregation and for the wider world. Our worship services are live streamed via Zoom, then later posted to our website and Facebook page. To protect the privacy and security of our children during this time for all ages, children may remain in your seats while we share a pre-recorded message. When the story is finished, kids are invited to leave the sanctuary for religious education. There are adults waiting in the back of the sanctuary to take you to your classrooms.
Hey everyone, today's story is an adaptation of The Three Questions by Leo Tolstoy. There once was a king who wanted more than anything in the world to be kind and just, but he wasn't sure how. He began asking everyone in his kingdom 3 questions, hoping that their answers would help. When is the right time? Who is the most important one? And what is the most important thing to do? As the people answered, the king listened and found that there were as many answers as there were people in the kingdom. Some said that to know the right time for every action, one must make a plan and live strictly according to it. Others still said that no one person could know everything, so it was important to have a circle of wise friends to help make decisions. And others said that there was no way to know the most important thing to do unless you can see into the future, so to answer this question, you must be a magician. None of these answers sounded quite right to the king. Finally, it came time to ask a teacher who lived in the nearby woods, who was known far and wide as the wisest teacher of the age. When the king approached the teacher's hut, the wise teacher was digging the ground, creating a garden. The king was surprised to find that the teacher was weak and tired. "You are tired," said the king. "Let me take the spade and work a while for you." The king began digging as the teacher rested. 1 hour passed, and then another. And suddenly, they heard a noise in the bushes. A rabbit came running out of the woods, clearly injured. The king dropped the spade to tend to the injured rabbit. Together, he and the teacher washed and bandaged the wound, then watched happily as the rabbit hopped away to its burrow. After a time, the king remembered his intended purpose for his journey. "Wise teacher," said the king, "I came to ask your answers to my 3 questions. When is the right time? Who is the most important one? What is the most important thing to do?" "You've already been answered," said the teacher, looking up at the king. "If you had not stayed to help me, I would have never finished these gardens. So the most important time was when you were digging the beds, and I was the most important one, and to help me was your most important business. Afterwards, when that rabbit ran to us, the most important time was when you were caring for its wounds. So the rabbit was the most important one, and what you did for it was your most important thing. Remember then, there is only one time that is important, and that is now. The most important one is the one you are with. And the most important thing to do is to do good, because that, my friend, is why we are here."
I'm gonna get it one of these times. But I was just saying, if there were still children in here, you can find your grown-ups in the back to go to religious ed if you are still in the sanctuary. Now we turn to our request for offering. The mission of Birmingham Unitarian Church is to be a free and welcoming religious community that encourages lives of integrity, learning, service, and joy. One way we live out this mission is by giving half our weekly offering to a nonprofit organization that shares our values and addresses needs in one of these areas: environmental action, justice, civic engagement, and racial justice. We support a new organization every month. This plates sharing recipient is Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, also known as BLUU, which was formed in 2015. We have a video in which Reverend Michael Slack tells us a bit more about the work of this organization.
Hello, everyone. I'm Reverend Michael, Community Minister for Worship and Spiritual Care for Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. For folks who may not know, Blue has been a truly life-saving community and experience for Black people all across our faith since 2015. We offer regular online worship services, pastoral care, daily affirmations, opportunities for political education, as well as local and national organizing, children and youth programming, offerings of love and care both virtually and in person, including community-led workshops and book studies and Blue Havens, which are Black UU meetup groups, and Blue Harbors, which are soon to be established Black UU spiritual communities. As part of our commitment to changing the material conditions of Black people, Blue's Northside Housing Cooperative Initiative is in full swing, a 2 to 3 year project to create and support the development of new, actually affordable long-term housing that can help build wealth for 32 Black and Indigenous families, comprising 8 different cooperatives in North Minneapolis. We are also in the process of providing COVID relief grants to Black UUs who need the additional support during what has been a truly horrifying and harrowing year. There are wise ways of knowing, innovating, and living in the skin and bones of Black people. That we are still here is a testament to that fact. We draw inspiration, direction, and provocation from our ancestors, including Black Unitarians, Black Universalists, and Black Unitarian Universalists, who forged pathways at the intersection of faith and justice. We see in their lives not just a timeline of historical facts and incidents, but evidence and source material for our way of evaluating and thinking about living our tradition. We are inspired by all they did, with far less access to resources and information. So, on their behalf, and on behalf of the organizing collective board of directors and staff, our advisory team and council of elders, Team Sankofa, our organizing team, and all the people who call Blue their spiritual home, I say thank you. Thank you for these gifts that will continue to grow us and our work, and thank you for your ongoing support. May all this love help us live more fully into our vision statement, which reminds us of this. Blue harnesses love's power to combat oppression and foster healing as a spiritual and political imperative. We know the power of love to be life-changing, inclusive, relational, uncomfortable, unconditional, and without end. Thanks again.
Let there be an offering in support of our beloved community and organizations that build the world we dream about. This morning's offering will now be received with gratitude. Ushers, please come forward. Ushers, please come forward. We are a church of open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands. With gratitude, we dedicate this offering to the good works of our congregation and dedicate ourselves to its service.
We've come to the time in our service for prayer and centering. We begin with the weekly sharing of joys and sorrows. First, a joy from Kathy Duhame. Congratulations to Sophia Kendra, who will walk for her master's in counseling next weekend from Wayne State University. And I just realized that her name might be Sophia. Is that the correct pronunciation? Sophia. Thanks, Kathy. And next, we have news from Dan Kasuth and Colleen Kavanagh. Dan is at home recovering from prostate surgery and is looking forward to returning to worship services soon. Among life's joys, we also share in each other's sorrows. From Reverend Mandy, our congregation shares a sorrow with the family of Grace Kachaturoff. Grace joined our congregation in 1982 and died on April 17th at the age of 98. Our thoughts are with Grace's family. I invite you now to join me as we move further into prayer and centering. With these words from Derek Jackson, we are called. In these times, we are called to step into the mess and murk of life, called to be strong and vulnerable, called to console and to challenge, called to be grounded and hold lofty ideals, called to love in the face of hate. We are called, and it is not easy, and we will not always agree. And we will yell and scream and cry, and we will laugh and smile and sing. We are called to be together. We need one another, holding each other accountable to our covenants, to the holy, to love and justice. In these times, we are called. Let us take a moment to call to mind those in our lives who have concerns that have not been spoken yet today. I invite you to bring to mind somebody you hold in your heart who needs love or care. Perhaps someone who feels the pain and exclusion of racism or other oppressions, or one who longs for beloved community. As you're comfortable and willing, please speak that person's name out loud. There may remain in our hearts joys and sorrows that are too tender to be spoken. Let us keep them there, tender and held in love. Let us be a source of strength and support for each other, today and always. Amen and blessed be.
Comfort me,
Good morning. My name is Pat Butkowitz. I've been a member of the congregation for about 3 years, and I'm really pleased to be able to address you today. In an email dated June 2020, General Motors CEO Mary Barra sent an email to her 155,000 employees worldwide. Quote, "There's a big difference between seeing what's wrong and doing what's right." She noted her impatience and disgust that we as a nation have been placated by the passive discussion of why. She continued, "Let's stop asking why and start asking what. What are we going to do?" In this moment, we must each decide what we can do individually and collectively to drive change, meaningful, deliberate change. There comes a time when we are compelled to stop diagnosing what is wrong and start advocating for what is right. And this is what she committed General Motors to. We commit to inclusion. That means creating the conditions where every single human who believes in inclusion is welcome within our walls. We unequivocally condemned intolerance. That means racism, bigotry, discrimination, and any other form of named or unnamed hatred. We stand up against injustice. That means taking the risk of expressing an unpopular or polarizing point of view because complacency and complicity sit in the shadow of silence. That is the gist of the 8th principle. This is what we must affirm as a congregation. We are a people of good faith, good intention, goodwill, and perhaps limited exposure to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, otherwise known as BIPOC. Say their names: Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and literally hundreds, if not thousands more in the last 100 years. We react with grief, horror, and anger. But do we realize the ripple effect of their deaths? Not just on the dead families or the dead person's families and friends, but on all BIPOC people. Now, I speak from a rarefied position. I am the mother of a person of color, a white mother of a person of color. I adopted my daughter as an infant and face questions about my daughter's origins on almost a daily basis. "She's awfully dark," said my own mother upon my daughter's arrival from Nepal. I said nothing, counting on my mother's good heart. She soon bore that out, beginning a love affair with her granddaughter that lasted until her death. My own sister commented that my daughter would need to watch her sun exposure so as not to be too dark. By that time, I had developed a bit of chutzpah and replied, "My only worry is that she'll be able to find a foundation that will match her skin color." Strangers asked, "What is she? How much did she cost?" A 9-year-old in the neighborhood asked if my daughter was discarded in a trash can. What I really wanted to reply was that white American prom queens were the ones usually doing that. But then again, the little girl was 9. Men sexualized her looks as an infant, commenting how hot she would be when she would be an adult. Flash forward to elementary school. The kids calling her Sacagawea on the playground. The school system marking that as teasing instead of racial discrimination. Flash forward to her isolation in high school as other Asian Americans were standoffish because her mother was white. She and her Muslim American friend tried to shrug off that rejection, saying, "Well, we were raised white." And indeed they were. They were raised in white families. Flash forward to college in the era of Donald Trump, with his instigation of racial hatred, inspiring people to vandalize Jewish graves and to shoot 2 Asian Indian Americans and joining a beer after work, just to name a few incidents. She listened to the news and was afraid to take the bus to shop for groceries or go to school. This is a long-winded way of saying that we're exhausted from constant, lifelong micro and macro aggressions. And if we're exhausted as a transracial family of two, white and Asian Indian, what must others feel like? Because believe you me, there is a hierarchy of color in this country as there are in many other countries. If you want to adopt a white infant in this family, you'll pay tens of thousands more than adopting an Asian, Hispanic, or Black child. I look at our experience and I am sorrowful, but I am horrified for Black families, that they have to instruct their beautiful sons how to interact with police to avoid getting killed. That driving while Black is an offense most likely to happen in wealthy white communities, like right out here on Woodward. Once again, say their names: Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. We face a racial reckoning around anti-Black police violence and how language about Black families perpetuate dangerous and inaccurate myths. Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization, pointed out that leaders and politicians have used policies to structurally disadvantage Black families for decades and for centuries, in my estimation. These policies are enabled by myths suggesting that Black families are less deserving, lack ambition, and are wholly responsible for conditions that are, in fact, far outside of their control. Government leaders, their policies and inaction have allowed COVID-19 to disproportionately infect and harm Black communities. Judges give Black people 20% longer sentences than white people for the same crimes. Black people are 1.75 times more likely to face those charges as compared to white folks. The net result, Black families are forced apart at much higher rates than other families. We cannot be complicit and sit in the shadow of silence. We are a people of good faith, good intention, and goodwill. We must speak up. It is time to adopt the 8th principle.
Good morning. My name is Marty Salagi, and I have been a member of BUC since 2014. In order to tell the story of how my racism began, I needed to trace it back to the beliefs of my adoptive parents. My mother, born in Tennessee, was the daughter of a Southern belle who had a Black mammy. I was raised in Bloomfield Hills, and my parents were sufficiently well off to afford housekeepers. Some of them were African American. I remember my mother telling me that Black people liked to steal things from their employers. My father, a vascular surgeon, was born in Hungary and immigrated to this country at the height of the Depression. My parents moved from Detroit to Bloomfield Hills in 1960. He used to enjoy watching the Beverly Hillbillies and Hee Haw because he liked to laugh at the dumb white Southerners. Although he experienced discrimination when he arrived in America, he forgot about how much that must have stung in his attitude towards Black people. He used his education to justify his beliefs in the inferiority of the Black race, citing books such as The Bell Curve to prove that science and statistics backed him up. Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination did not distress him. Yet, in my exploration of his vast library, I found on his shelves such books as Soul on Ice by Eldridge Cleaver and the autobiography of Malcolm X. My father also surprised me when he accepted the invitation to a barbecue given by a Black scrub nurse whose skillfulness he had respected. He and I actually made the trip to her home in Detroit. Imagine my confusion. Even as a young child, I took the racism inculcated into me out into the wider world. I clearly recall being at a sleepover with one of my elementary school friends and making the comment that all Black people were on welfare. My friend's mother, who just happened to be a member of the Briggs family who owned the old Tiger Stadium, admonished me with these words, "We don't speak that way in this house." This marks the first time my racism was challenged by other white people. Once I moved out of the home where I was raised, I began to see how all kinds of people struggle and did volunteer work at Haven and the Michigan NABES hotline. For the last 10 years, I have professionally served persons challenged by homelessness. I have not been able to close my white suburban eyes to the structural inequities that marginalize Black and other people of color. My real awakening began, however, when I rejoined BUC in 2014. I joined the Social Justice Committee immediately. At that time, we focused on economic inequality. Discussions about race were an integral part of that work. My activism was ignited. This church became the vehicle for deep change within myself. I believe wholeheartedly that BUC must adopt the eighth principle. Its position is explicit. The words call out to us as a spiritual imperative, and I would even more strongly argue as a moral commandment. I would like to end my talk with a quote from Reuben Hurricane Carter, a boxer unjustly incarcerated for 19 years for murders he did not commit. Quote, "It is very important that we transcend the places that hold us," end of quote. If we as individuals and as a congregation commit to and actively embrace the soul work of anti-racism, transcending those places that hold us is possible. Thank you.
I am Art Hillman. I've been a UU for 48 years. I've been a member of BUC for 44 of those years, off and on. So, I was at GA a few years ago, and this woman walked up to me and said, "It's you." And at that time, I had done approximately 100 consult with UU churches, so there were a lot more people who knew me than I knew them. So my first reaction was to look at the name tag. The name tag said Reverend, and I looked below, Kokomo, Indiana, UU Church. She said, "You started or restarted our congregation." Well, in fact, the church phone was in our house. The sermon's information was in our house. But the real mover and shaker was the person that I've learned the most about UU from, and that was Chris Hillman. And no, not the person who started the band, the Birds, I think that's right, or the person who was a board member here at BUC. It was the Reverend Christine Hillman, as she decided she wanted to be called, who had gone to seminary and training and preaching on every one of the Great Lakes, which you might remember I had deposited her ashes in. It was a pleasure to watch her lead the Olinda Church, the Olinda Church of Essex County, Ontario, in Canada. I recall trying to get the congregation to tithe, and because they had had a endowment when the 8 congregations that were started in Southwest Canada or Ontario, the situation was they had learned not to tithe. But the endowment was shrinking, so she had to get the congregation to step up and tithe. That was no easy task. Also, I watched her as she guided the congregation at all times, keeping them together, to put in the solar panels of the church, so that they finally said, "Okay, we'll do it, but we don't want it to show on our beautiful old church," which had been there since 1882. It turned out that they started to make so much money because you use a church maybe 50% of the time. They could sell the energy back to Hydro Canada. They may get the opportunity to go back and not pledge again. So, but she kept them together, and one of my favorite things in life was to go and stand in the glow of her, the way they, the reverence they held for her, and how much that ministry was a success. And in fact, she was the longest serving minister for that congregation. The other piece I want to share with you about myself is the Reverend Dr. Doug Gallagher and the Reverend Ralph Moreau recruited me to consult with the UUA Church Staff Finance Group. Let me tell you a little bit about them. They had started this program called the Church of the Living Tradition. And what that means is that they would build up a fund, and when they had ministers who suddenly died, or the situation where the minister's insurance came from a spouse who got a divorce or passed away, all of a sudden a person would be basically with no funds. And so they started to support people. They supported fellowships for new ministers. They've supported fellowships for retired ministers who had no income. That became very successful. Secondly, they focused on healthcare issues of UU ministers and congregational staffs. So they developed an insurance program and have a very successful program at this time. The one that I'm most proud of is the one that I spend the most energy on, is they did a study in 1997 that determined that ministers were moving approximately every 3 years because the only way you could get a pay raise was move to a bigger congregation. So after great research, we came up with a plan based on 12 criteria that help more equitably pay ministers. When I left, I think it was 2018, the average stay at a congregation for a minister had gone to 7.6 years. To me, that was the greatest accomplishment that we had accomplished. So, enough about me. I want to talk about how I have been impacted over the years and have watched UU step up and make a difference. Many of you, I'm sure, like me, was taught when there's an action, there's a reaction. At the same time, I've been taught if you stretch a rubber band, it never goes back to where it was. So, in the late 1760s, the King of England decided that he did not like all of this rigmarole that was going on in the colonies, and he needed to send soldiers to put down the uprising. In one of those, in 1770, a raucous crowd was in Boston, and the soldiers decided to shoot into the crowd. The first person who was hit was Crispus Attucks, a black man of black and Indian descent, 47 years old, who had been a sailor, a longshoreman, and various other occupations in his lifetime. So the commandant, wanting to win hearts and souls, decided that 3 soldiers should go on trial, and he asked a young lawyer to defend them. That young lawyer was a UU, John Adams, the first Unitarian Universalist president in this country. He actually got them off, got them acquitted, proving that they could not tell whose bullet killed Crispus Attucks or who fired that shot. The second Unitarian Universalist president was Adams' son, John Quincy Adams. He was involved in the first disputed presidential contest. He was the northeastern son of a previous president running against the hero of the Indian campaigns and the hero of New Orleans, Andrew Jackson. It came in as a tie. I think we had 16 states at the time. So it went to the House of Representatives, so each state would have 1 vote. And Florida decided, as they often seem to, negotiate their vote, and the vote went to John Quincy Adams. Unfortunately, 4 years later, Jackson won handedly. But the stepping up part was that Quincy Adams decided to become an abolitionist and push for removing people from enslavement. And he did such an effective job that the Congress of the US decided, again, action, reaction, that no one could speak the words slavery on the Congress floor, and that lasted until the Civil War. The next UU who was a leader of one of the major two parties had ran in 1944. He was from Michigan. He moved to New York and became the governor of New York. And he ran in 1944 against Roosevelt, who basically was the most popular president in our history based on the number of elections he won, and lost. So now Roosevelt had won 4 times. But he didn't quit. He ran again in 48 and did such a good job that there are newspapers around that said, Dewey beats Truman. So John Dewey was the last UU who were on a major ticket. He didn't stop there. In 1952, the Democrats and the Republicans wanted Dwight Eisenhower to be their banner carrier. And Dewey took on the effort of getting Eisenhower to become a Republican, and not only that, guided his campaign to success. Another UU stepping up and doing the right thing. The next one I want to talk about is a young man who's lived with his grandparents, who were members of one of the UU congregations in Seattle, Washington. But as his career grew, he needed to join a black church of Reverend Wrights in Chicago. So we cannot claim Barack Obama, even though, like many of our young people, he had done church school and now he's moved to a different congregation. Lastly, I want to talk about UUs who stepped up and gave their life for justice and doing the right thing. Reverend James Reed went south to help people vote and was murdered there. Also, Leola Vauso from our mother church, the UU Church in Detroit, also went to answer the call and was murdered. What I'm trying to communicate is a vision that I have of UUs, of stepping up and solving problems. So my question is, why should one urban congregation of one of the small denominations vote for the 8th principle? Recently in the news, Senator Mallory McMahon said that people, not the minority group, must take responsibility for changing this. So I hope Birmingham Unitarian Church follow the lead of our young people and this congregation vote for the 8th principle, even if it's only been 250 years.
We're now going to sing hymn number 1008 in the Teal Book, When Our Heart is in a Holy Place.
When our heart is in a holy place, heart is in a holy place. When we tell our story deep inside, and we listen with a loving mind, and we hear our voices in each other's words, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when we share the silence of sacred space, and the blood of our heart stirs within, and we feel the power of each other's faith, then our heart is in a holy place. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place, we are blessed with love and amazing grace. When our heart is in a holy place, when our heart is in a holy place.
Go now into this world as a beacon of hope and joy. Go in love, go in peace. Now that our worship has ended, our service begins. May it be so. Amen and blessed be.